everybody. My name is Umayma Faris. I come to this workshop very eager to learn and listen and share the gems that I'm sure will be shared with us tonight. As a mother, as a grandmother, and as a participant in the Muslim community in Canada and in Ottawa. And also I live in Gatineau, so I have I consider a unique position because I also live in Quebec, which, as all you know, as everyone here knows, is not the easiest province to live in these days that we are in today. The topic is Islamophobia and how to address fear and such issues with your children. And I think it's really important to reflect on this topic. We have been running a series of parenting workshops since COVID actually started, and so many topics have been covered. But this topic of tonight, I think it's really important because before we can talk to our children, I think it's important for us as grown-ups, as adults, as aunts and uncles, as parents, and as teachers, we are able to process and understand and come to terms with the environment that we live in. And this environment isn't just in Canada. This is an environment for a Muslim living anywhere in the world. And not only today, but if you look back in our history, Muslims have always had their challenges and their difficulties. It's the challenges of dunya. And these challenges began since the day of the Prophet ﷺ. It's nothing new. It may feel new to us. It may feel troubling to us. But subhanAllah, there's nothing new about the challenges that we are facing today. Having said that, when we have children around, it's really, really important for us to, as grown-ups, to be able to process what's going on and have the ability to share with the young among us and to dialogue with them and to interact with them in such a way that we don't breed fear, but we breed hope and love and caring, just like our Prophet ﷺ did. I don't want to talk too much, but this subject has impacted me greatly over the past few weeks. And I'm really eager to learn tonight from our very, very, mashallah, amazing speakers. So I'm in a very fortunate position that I know each of our speakers very well. And I'm not going to go into lengthy bios, but these are gems of our community, and they share gems, and they lead us by example. So I have learned so much from each person that will be speaking tonight. And I hope that in the end, we can entertain some of your questions and answers, inshallah. We will start this evening with our beloved Sheikh and Imam, and a brother that, in my view, he can take something that is very hard pill to swallow, and he can make it a bit easier for us to swallow. This is my experience with Dr. and Sheikh Imam Zijad. And my experience with him is he can enlighten me with the gems that he has, but he has a way of making something that's very hard to swallow, something I am able to process. So Jazakallah khair. Imam will start, and after Imam, we will proceed with each person will have about 10 minutes, and in the end, we will have questions and answers. Feel free to put your questions and your answers in the chat box if you prefer, and then we will take them from the chat box. Or if you like, you may wait and then put up your hand. There's an icon for that on your screen, and then we can take those questions at the end, bi'iznillahi ta'ala. So, Jazakallah khair, everybody. Can you please help enlighten us, Sheikh, about this extremely important topic and give us whatever gems you can share with us this evening. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Before we just start, I want to ask, is my internet connection, okay?
Yes,
you hear me well?
Hear you. Yes, your voice is very clear, mashallah.
Excellent. No cuts up, because I do find I'm in the basement and I'm trying to connect it right, but alhamdulillah, we will try to move it through. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ajma'in. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وكان يدعو وهذه الدعاء دعاء مشهورة يعني في السنة من الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم إليك أشكو ضعف قوتي وقلة حيلتي. This dua, Prophet peace be upon him, made in a very difficult moment when people of Taif rejected him. Not only that they rejected him, but stormed him out with rocks. And Prophet peace be upon him made this dua, sober dua that we have to learn from, and inshallah I will speak about it by the end of my 10 minutes. Islamophobia is not a new phenomenon. I do remember I wrote first article in 2007, 2008. I presented several presentations at the University of Ottawa on the topic. But that was not beginning of Islamophobia. Neither September 11th is beginning of Islamophobia. Islamophobia goes back the first message of our deen when Prophet peace be upon him started going public in Mecca. Those who haven't been able to swallow up the truth attacked, abused, did everything possible to slow down the message. But Prophet peace be, he will go full speed. Doesn't matter if they would give him to stop that message, give him sun in the right, moon in the left, he will not quit. So how do we deal with Islamophobia from spiritually attuned perspective? How do we act on the basis of Islamic formative principles, Quran and the Sunnah? How do we follow Muhammad sallallahu not be like abusers? My approach is rooted in my personal upbringing, my family support, my living in Bosnia that was a very challenging condition to live as a Muslim in a communist regime, and afterwards during aggression, as well as in my personal interest of assisting Canadian Muslims to settle in Canada, to integrate in Canada, and my research and my intellectual curiosity on the topic. And my approach to Islamophobia from spiritually attuned perspective is a three-way approach. And as Sister Umayma pointed out, we as parents, if we want to talk to kids, we as teachers, if you want to talk to kids, we as imams, if you want to talk to kids, we as Muslim leaders, if you want to talk to our kids, we need to know what we want to talk about. We cannot just talk emotions. We live in a very sensitive time. Therefore, information that we share could impact our children, could impact our direction in Canada, and could impact our future. Therefore, we have to be very wise. In one of my last khutbahs, I spoke about parents and communication with our children. And I very clearly indicated there is no taboo topic. There is no topic that we should not talk about with our kids. If they don't talk to us, they maybe talk to somebody else. But we need to definitely get acquainted with the information we want to share with them. So my approach, as I said, is a three-way approach that is very much Islamically bound, engraved. Quran and the Sunnah, life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So first approach is, I don't want to be like abusers. I do not want to be like them. I want to be like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because Quran tells, وَلَا تَسْتَبِ الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ. There is no way that you can compare evil with good. No way. It's impossible to compare evil with good. Idfa' billati hiya ahsan. Repel when something evil has been done to you. Don't go eye for an eye. Repel. Find other alternative. Better alternative. Respond with much better. Repel with goodness. ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. Maybe even the worst of the enemies, those who have been talking bad about you, attacking you, maybe because of your attitude and your approach, maybe they will become your allies, close friends, sympathizers of your faith and your community. And Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he was the model in this. Think about liberation of Mecca. Think what mushriks of Mecca have done to him. When he came with a 10,000 strong army, he has been able to return every evil. But Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam took very high ethical, moral road in dealing with them. They have been scared. They knew how tradition was working in that region. But Prophet, peace be upon him, told them, اذهبوا فأنتم الطلقاء. All of you are free. Full amnesty to all of you. So, my brothers and sisters, when dealing with our children and when dealing with anybody else, we need to explain to them that Muslim way of treating this matter from spiritually attuned perspective is that we cannot be like abusers. We cannot go so low as them because we act on the basis of the mission of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was to raise and elevate our ethics to the highest possible level. But that does not mean that Muslims would tolerate and bear abuses. Muslims would not. Muslims are obliged to prevent abuses. Of course, my second point then would be, I will use all my possible legal means to stop abusers, to stop Islamophobes. And alhamdulillah, we live in a country of rule of law. Even sometimes if it is slow in terms of attaining it, but mostly we attain it. I have seen it on many occasions where justice is being served. So we as Muslims, we should not take law into our own hands, but rather use the rule of law to attain our rights. Our job is to do preventative measure. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us. He said, "Unsur akhaka zaliman aw madluma." You help your brother. Doesn't matter. We are talking here about human brothers as well, not just Muslim brother. Help your brother, zalim aw madlum, abuser or abused. And then they asked, subhanallah, and companions, they said, "Hada nansuru ya madluman ya Rasulullah." We know we would help madlum, but كيف ننصره ظالما? How do we help zalim? How do we help abuser? How do we help unjust person? person who is contributing to evil every time raises his hand or opens mouth. How do we help that person? Prophet, peace be upon him, said, تَأْخُذُ فَوْقَ يَدَيْهِ. Stop him or her in doing that evil. Prevent them. And there are ways, as we have pointed out, there are ways, legal ways of preventing them. And alhamdulillah, there are other ways of preventing them from spiritually attuned perspective. We as Muslims, we have to talk about it with our neighbors. We have to get involved with interfaith groups. Proof that we are doing this work is how many letters of support from different religious groups, from different leaders we have received. How many neighbors came to us and told us, we are with you, we are in front of you. Our task, our job, our social duty and responsibility is to be with you. Why? Because alhamdulillah, Muslims after September 11th, they don't open mouth anymore and shout and scream emotionally, but rather they work wisely to remove Islamophobia from the community. And inshallah, we would very soon not talk about Islamophobia in Canada, because I know that Canadian Muslims are using all possible legal means to prevent this evil spread in Canada. And my third way of dealing with Islamophobia from Islamically attuned perspective is any fear, any challenge, any anxiety, turn it into dua. Turn every fear, every anxiety, every challenge into dua. Or Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's exactly what he did. He complained to God Almighty, to you, my Lord, Allahumma ilayka ashku da'fa quwwati. To you I complain about my weakness and means that are very scarce, that are not there. And then Prophet, peace be upon him, subhanallah, by the end of the dua, and this is dua of Taif, when angels came and told Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you tell us, you request, you ask Allah, and we will bring these two mountains together. And we'll bring these two mountains from which they used pebbles to hit at you, to throw at you, to bleed you. We will use the same pebbles to smash them and destroy them. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, no, but I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides their generation to be worshipping God Almighty. I ask that God Almighty brings them into faith, into belief. So my brothers and sisters, as you could see, there are ways how we could, inshallah, be sober, but be proactive at the same time. Not be static, not just wait, but rather do our share and then raise our hands to God Almighty. One of them, as we pointed out, we don't want to act like abusers. We don't want to be like them. We want to be on a higher ground as believers, as Prophet, peace be upon him, was. Number two, that does not mean that we will not act. That means we would act according to the rule of law, because we live in this beautiful country in which there is rule of law, and we have to use all possible means to get those who are abusing this law and creating this hatred against Muslims. We have to bring them to the court, and inshallah they would be brought to the court of law. And lastly, we should not allow to go into pessimism, to go into depression, but rather turn anxiety, turn challenges and fear into dua. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Imam Zijad. Jazakallah khair for your wise words. And I like your approach, mashallah, because it's very clear and it's 3 steps, easy for us overwhelmed people to remember. And I love your approach because it actually is following the way of all the prophets and all the different prophets that were tortured and mistreated by Allah, by the people that Allah sent them to. It's always an approach of measured and wisdom, not based on emotion, but based on keeping Allah first. And this is what we need to do with our children. We need to lead by example. We need to show our children. You mentioned something very important, that Muslims should not be showing emotion. I think it's really important as a teacher and as someone who deals with children. I think we need to help our children with the emotion, but to process the emotion so that we can move on to the action. I think sometimes we feel very hurt, we feel very targeted, we feel very much alienated from some parts of our communities or from society. And I think those emotions are true and real, and our kids may feel them. Maybe not the children who go to Islamic schools, but maybe the children who go to other public schools. And I think it's important for us as parents and leaders and imams and teachers to say, yeah, you might have that feeling, but what are you going to do about it? And go from a place of emotions to a place of measured action and some wisdom, and taking in the sunnah and taking in the sunnah of all the prophets, not our prophet, mashallah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but all the prophets went through these difficult moments. Every single prophet that Allah brought to a community. So Jazakallah khair for your words of wisdom. And I'd like to move to the next speaker, inshallah. It will be Principal Ghazala Choudhary. This is a person and a principal that I've worked with for years. And I learned so much from her, and also I continue to learn from her at the Tarbiyah Learning Academy. She's one of our young jewels in the community, mashallah, and it's someone I really love learning from. She will be our next speaker. She will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will move to the next speaker. Jazakallah khair. Principal Ghazala, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm just going to pull up my screen here. And as I'm doing that, I just want to say Jazakallah khair to Imam Zijad for those wonderful reminders, as well as to Sister Umima for that wonderful introduction. And I hope that everyone is doing well and in good spirits amidst everything that's happening, not just in Canada, but all over the world right now. So I'm going to touch upon, the topic of speaking to our children about tragedies and traumatic events. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the developmental aspects with regards to that topic, inshallah. So just to start out with this, the question always comes up, or maybe it has come up for you as a parent or as an educator, community leader, why do bad things happen? And not just why do bad things happen, but if I could add to that question, why do bad things happen to good people? So such as what happened to the Afdal family a few weeks ago on that Sunday night when they were just going out for a walk, like many families go out for a walk. Why were they killed in this act of terror? And this is a question that is difficult even for us as adults and educators and parents to sit with. But I'm going to give a few starting points of where you may be able to begin this conversation with your children, regardless of their age. And then I'm going to break it down a little bit with regards to different age groups. So where do you start? Well, find out first and foremost what your child may know already. As we know, our children have a lot of information at their fingertips through media, through social media, through speaking to their friends, whatever it might be. So perhaps start those questions by asking your child a few questions to see where they're at with the knowledge that they have. After you have that information from them, be sure to listen to what they're saying, not just, listen to a couple of words or a couple of sentences before you jump in and say, no, that's not what happened, this is what it was, but really actively listen and hear every word and every sentence that they're saying. And after you've done that, acknowledge what they are saying, because this is the information that they've been presented with. And when you're done acknowledging it, validate what they are feeling. So this is really important. These three things: to listen to your child, to acknowledge what they're saying, and then to validate the feelings that they might have, are really important regardless of your child's age. And then allow that process of grief. I mean, many of our children have not met, for example, the Afdal family, or have not gone to Palestine to see the atrocities that are occurring there and all over the world. But they may be bombarded with these images and these conversations, and maybe they turn on the news and they're seeing it. So allowing them that process of grief, just as Imam Zijad said, even for ourselves as parents and adults, we need to go through that grieving process. We can't block that off and just say, okay, no, I'm going to be strong and I'm not going to let this get to me. I'm going to wear my hijab proudly and go out for a walk today. We should. We actually should. I'm actually sitting in London, Ontario right now, not far from where the incidents happened. And yeah, we should not be scared to go out for a walk, but to allow ourselves to properly grieve is very important. And the same thing for our children. What questions do our children have? Because they may have many questions about what has happened, whether it's this particular incident or any other Islamophobic incident that's happening. So allowing them not to shun their questions, but having that safe space where they can ask questions that they may be pondering about. And then to have clear and concise information for them. Perhaps they do not have clear information and you do need to clarify some things, but after you have listened and acknowledged and validated, then to provide them some clear and concise information based on what they know. And just remember that having a conversation cannot be as bad as not having a conversation. Okay, some of us are very nervous, to have these conversations with our children because it will lead to anxiety and these things, but just always remember that having that conversation and keeping that lines of communication open is much better than not having that lines of communication at all, inshallah. So I just wanted to, start off with a few of those tips and those points before we get into the different age groups. So having said that, for young children, and here we're talking about children from the age of 3 to 6. So this is primarily preschool, kindergarten, maybe up until grade 1 children. So these are very young children. It may be best not to bring anything up with this particular age group. And I say that because these children are very small, right? And so they're not usually exposed to what's happening in the media and around the world and things like that. So they're very young developmentally as well. And so they may not be able to understand the full scope of the situation. And so if your child does not know anything about it, do not feel that, specifically for this age group that, okay, I have to go talk to my child about Islamophobia. I have to go talk to them, even if they're, 3, 4, 5, or 6 years old. That may be a very young age for them to process anything, and it may make the situation much more difficult for them. But if they do have questions, let them lead that conversation. And what do I mean by that? So for the past few years, I've been teaching like grade 1 and 2 students. And when this incident happened in London, Ontario, I chose obviously not to speak to my grade 2 students about this because they're about that age 6, age 7 age group. And so I felt that they probably don't know what happened. And so at the beginning of every class, and of course we were online due to the pandemic, I would just tell them, use the chat box. And if you have any questions or comments about anything at all, whatever's happening in your life, just use the chat box to put that down. And I'm going to read what you guys have written. And so this was a way for me to figure out, do they know anything about the situation? Do they need to speak to an adult about it? And most of them were just talking about, oh, I can't wait to go camping this weekend, or I got a new pet cat, or, things like that. And this happened like every day. So that kind of led me to believe that they don't know anything about the situation. If they just want to talk about camping and their pet cat, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to tell them this is what happened and this is what's, going on in Canada right now. So again, having them lead that conversation. So if they do have questions, so assume that one of my students did put down the chat box, I heard something about London, Ontario this weekend. I don't really know what's going on. I would have them name their feelings. I would maybe ask them follow-up questions. Okay, like what did you hear about London, Ontario? Oh, I heard this really nice family got killed. I'm feeling scared. Okay, that's a feeling right there. They've named a feeling, scared. Okay, yes, I understand. I'm also feeling scared. But there are ways that we can combat the fear that we have. How else are you feeling because of this incident? Well, I'm feeling sad. Now you've gotten them to name a few feelings, and you can, again, listen to them. You can acknowledge those feelings and you can validate them. And don't be afraid to talk about, yourself and put yourself into the conversation. The child will make that connection with you, obviously, at that point. But we don't need to get into gruesome details. We don't need to get into all of the nitty-gritty, but we can just speak in a general term about what's happening and have them name their feelings and have them talk through their feelings and come up with some solutions together. Again, this is for very young children. Then when we get to the children that are age 7 to 12, so this is primarily our children that are in elementary school, you know, grade 2, grade 3, up until about grade 7 and 8 before they go into high school. There's a few things that we need to keep in mind. So one thing is that their exposure to media should be limited. And I realize that that's easier said than done, but these are still fairly young children. They're not in their preteen or teenage years per se yet. And so the amount of information that they're going to be taking in, whether it's through the news or whether it's through social media, can be very damaging to them. And, you know, I have an example of one student that was on social media and would continuously read the comment section, you know, with regards to certain events. And this was not very healthy for him because he would kind of zip through the positive comments and he would get very fixated on that 10% of negative comments that were in the comment section in Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, wherever he was. And so, you know, we had a conversation with the mother and we actually decided that let's just disconnect for a whole week, you know, maybe just take the family away for a week. It's just online school. They can connect to online school anywhere, because it was just becoming overwhelming to him to a point where he was just reading the comment section all the time. And so just to be aware that there's a lot out there on the media, and so that exposure to media should be as limited as possible. And then also to wait and see if they ask. So children at this age, are they asking questions about what's happening in the world? If they're not asking, maybe they're not aware of it. And again, maybe it's better to leave it for the time being. But if they are asking, then, you know, the same steps that we outlined for the previous age group would be good for this age group as well. And just to answer their questions with accurate information. So we don't necessarily need to sugarcoat things. I mean, we do need to speak in an age appropriate way, but just make sure that the information you're giving them is accurate. And then also to provide specific reasons to show that we are safe, because one of the big things are going to come out, well, I don't feel safe. I don't want to go for a walk anymore. I just don't feel safe going to the park or playing with my friends. But then giving them specific reasons to show that, you know, we did go out for a walk as a family together, or we did go camping this weekend. Everything was fine and we met very friendly people and things like that. So giving them very specific reasons with regards to that. And then also realizing that they may not want to talk for long periods of time. So you could have a conversation with a child of this age group. You know, maybe today in the morning, I had a conversation with one of my kids about this. And then maybe 3 or 4 days are going to go by and they're not going to mention it again. They're just going to go kind of back to their daily routines. And that's okay, because they need time to process. So it doesn't mean that if you start up a conversation, you may have 5-10 minute conversation and then they're always going to want to talk about it. They need time to process, and maybe 3 or 4 days will go by and then they'll bring it up again. And so just to be aware of that, and also to just look out for signs to invite them to talk. So if you see that they're struggling, you know, they have a loss in appetite, they're a bit more anxious than they usually were, these are usually signs that they may want to talk to you, because children are not always very upfront that, hey, mom, dad, you know what, I'm really scared, I want to talk to you guys. They usually act out in other ways. So just to be aware of that and using that as an invitation to get them to speak, inshallah. And then the final age category that I'm including here are ages 13 plus, so our preteens and our teens. So in this category, we have to assume that they do know. So for the younger kids, we were assuming that, okay, maybe they know, maybe they don't know, most likely they don't know. But for this category, because most of them have cell phones, they're on social media all the time, assume that they do know what's going on. But at the same time, also assume that the information that they have is incomplete. Okay, and then keep an eye out for drastic changes, again, in their behavior, in their appetite, in their mood. Like, are these things that you're noticing a very drastic change in? And then to also remember that we cannot force a teen to talk about their feelings, and that usually is not helpful. And I speak from experience with regards to that with our, you know, older grade 7 and 8 students, but with my own 2 kids at home, that if I force them, okay, we need to sit down, we're going to talk about this, it usually backfires, you know, almost 100% of the time it backfires. But if I let them speak or text first, and notice I didn't just put let them speak first, let them text first. So I mean, even right now I have my phone here, my kids know I'm in this room doing this session, but I said, if you need anything, just text me, because this is a form of, you know, communication that they are used to. How do they communicate with their friends? They text each other. They usually don't pick up the call, you know, pick up the phone and have a voice call. They usually text. So allow them that space that space of text messaging or whatever works for them, and allow them to initiate that conversation. And again, be honest. It's totally okay to tell the way that you feel, to your teens and preteens. If you're feeling anxious about the situation, just say it. You know what, this is really upsetting to me. I feel really upset to know that this is the country we've been living in, and this is what's happening to our people and the indigenous people. And just talk about it. Be honest about your feelings, and then encourage them to stay connected. And sometimes our teens and preteens don't feel comfortable speaking to us. That is okay. That doesn't mean that we're a bad parent. Maybe they feel comfortable speaking to an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a community leader or somebody in university in one of the MSAs or something like that. Just encourage them to stay connected to someone that is trustworthy, someone that would be able to give them the accurate knowledge and give them that support system that they need, even if that's their friend. So again, just encouraging them to stay connected. And just very briefly, I mentioned that I was in London, Ontario, and so we actually went with my kids and my brother's kids to visit the intersection where the Afzal family was murdered. And prior to going there, we hadn't really had our kids talk about it. We were waiting for the cues from them. They were just kind of quiet and processing the situation. But after we went to the janazah, we went to that site, we sat down and we started to talk to them about it. And this is when their feelings kind of came out, and they said, this felt really real today. Like, this is the first time that it really hit us that this has happened. And that was an opportunity for them to talk and for us to be honest and reciprocate that communication. And so again, if it happens weeks later or whatever it is important to have that conversation. But again, let them initiate that conversation, because that's when that valuable information on how they're feeling is going to come out, inshallah. And just to end off, this is another question that would come up, and I briefly touched upon it, but just the fact that children might be asking, why do good things happen? Sorry, why do bad things happen to good people? Like we started off with that question, but children also may be asking as well as adults, are we safe? Are we really, as Muslims and visible minorities and in Canada, are we really safe? So again, there's a few points to remember here, some of which I've already mentioned, just to acknowledge and validate that feeling. So if a child is saying, are we safe? Do not brush it off and say, yeah, of course we're safe. Yeah, like, what are you thinking? Of course we're safe, yes. But again, acknowledge it and say, I understand, that you're asking yourself that question. I too ask myself that question sometimes. And again, validate those feelings that they're having of fear. Ensure them that we always have to tie our camel, right? We always have to take the necessary precautions. So we're not going to go out walking at midnight, things like that. We're not going to go walking without our cell phone just in case. So we are taking necessary precautions, but we're not going to stop going to the park or stop going for a picnic or, going for a walk. And again, as we mentioned, always provide them with the correct information. And of course, at the forefront of all of our conversations and everything is that we must place our trust in Allah. So yes, we tie our camel, but that trust and tawakkul is always in Allah. And we as adults and parents, as difficult as it may be sometimes, we must model hope and faith. So if we model that hope and faith and that reliance on Allah and our deen, inshallah, our children at the end of the day will feel comfortable coming to us and they will do the same, inshallah. So I'm going to leave it at that to stay within the time limit. Jazakallah khair. I'd be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Principal Ghazala. If you're before you leave, I'm not sure if you're leaving or not, because there are 3 or 4 questions in the chat box, so we could address them now, or you could wait. It's up to you.
It's totally up to you guys. I'm okay with.
So I'm not sure if you're staying to the end. That's why I want to check if you want to deal with them. So if you go into the chat box, one of the questions, I think you did talk about it, but there's no harm in repeating that information because I think it's really important. So how do I know when I'm having a discussion, like I often have these talks with my grandchildren, how do I know that I validated? This is what the question was. Like, what's an indicator to you that I actually validated their feelings? Right.
So just basically, first of all, I'm talking about young kids again, because that's when we were talking about validating the child's feelings. So if a child comes and they say, I heard something on the news about, something that happened, and I'm feeling really scared. So just to say that, okay, I recognize you're feeling scared. Okay, I understand you're feeling scared. I too sometimes feel scared. And maybe giving them an example of when you feel scared. And this is what I do when I feel scared. You know, I say, I make a dua. I start with Bismillah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect me. I read the Ayatul Kursi. I do these things. So validating their feelings, just recognizing their feelings, just agreeing with them that yes, you feel scared. And then giving an example of yourself. I also feel scared, and giving them a further example as to when you felt scared and what you did to combat that fear and get over the fear, because you're not going to be stuck in that place of fear, right? You're going to move forward somehow. And again, modeling what you did to move forward from that fear or that sadness or that anxiety, whatever that feeling may be, again, in terms that the child would understand, inshallah.
Jazakallahu khairan. There's another question that's really important. I'm just going to read it. It's in the chat box. Nabiha from Halifax saying, Assalamu alaikum. How can I relate to other Muslims who sort of deny the existence of Islamophobia, since they may not have experienced it themselves or some other reason they may have, that this issue does exist and that it needs to be combated? Jazakallahu khairan.
I'm actually going to leave that one up to Imam Zijad, inshallah. I think that ties in more with what he was speaking about.
Okay, and then there's another one with teens. How can we keep the teens away? You did address this, but maybe you want to elaborate. How do we keep the teens away from hateful thoughts in response to Islamophobic attacks?
So I'm assuming hateful thoughts with regards to their own self-identity. Is that what we're...
I'm thinking maybe hateful thoughts they're reading when, like, you know how you mentioned that child had read all the negative comments and I don't know, how can we keep the teens away from hateful thoughts in response? Oh, I think she means hateful thoughts in response to Islamophobic. So when people are attacking our faith, how do I keep my teen from feeling hate towards those people?
Right, right. And I think that's where we come back to, you know, the way of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Imam Ziyad mentioned some examples of the life, you know, the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so I think it's really important for us to remember that, yes, you know, people may be acting on hate, and these crimes are happening, and these hate crimes are happening, and Islamophobic attacks and whatever it is, but we are not a people of hate, right? We are people that conquer with love, regardless of, you know, people may be showing us hate, but in response we must respond with love, right? My niece and nephew
from speech girl,
right.
or that's
Someone's
the
not muted.
principal.
Okay, there we go.
Kindly mute yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair. So they were also participating in like an anti-hate march that was actually put together by multi-faith communities in London, Ontario. And I remember their signs, and my niece is in SK and my nephew's in grade 2. And so their signs basically said, love, not hate, and we are a people of love. And they were proudly, you know, carrying these signs out to the march. And so I think this says a lot. And we saw a lot of children participating with very similar signs that, you know, we need to be kind to each other. And, you know, these are things that seem very simple, but just to, you know, let them know that the Prophet ﷺ also conquered with love and his character and the beauty of his character, and to go back to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, as simple as that sounds. But this is a good place to start with our kids, whether they're preteens, whether they're teens, whether they're, you know, kids that are in grade 3 or 4, whatever the case might be, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. I wanted to thank you, Jazakallah khair, for your, I really like the way you broke down the ages, because many of our homes, we have several children and they are from different age groups, and the approach to each age group is different. And I think it's really tricky for parents to figure out, you know, what do I say to my teenager? What do I say to my toddler? And then this is a milieu where you have a mix of children, so they may be overhearing, right? Like the toddler might not know much, but he's hearing what the other one's saying, or the SK. I find that if the student is in SK, but there's no other children in the house, it's very different than a student who has teenage siblings or primary school siblings, because they're going to hear things that, so subhanAllah, we're often in mixed milieus. We're not always in a milieu with one of those. Like, you've broken it down well. But it's so interesting that our families have that whole mix, right? But I think it's important to have that honest, open approach. And I love what you said about no conversation is going to be more dangerous than any conversation we have. And I think that that addresses Islamophobia. It addresses some of my other discussions with parents. I think when we're ready to deal with it as parents, that's when we're ready to have a conversation with our children. And it's hard. It's hard. It's not something easy, but that is why we are the leads of our family, because that responsibility lies on our shoulders, whether we're imams or teachers or parents. It really doesn't matter. Allah has always given us responsibilities within our circle. So your message is very universal, because we all have kids around, whether they're our own children or their relatives or even neighbors. I mean, subhanAllah, you never know who your neighbor is, and you might have to address these issues with them. Jazakallah khair, Principal Ghazala, and I hope you stick around for I can see there's more questions coming. Jazakallah khair. All right, so
One thing.
we will move now to our...
Sister Umayma,
Yes, sorry.
if you
Go
don't
ahead.
mind. One thing that is important.
Sorry, there's a lot of feedback. Please try again. Let's see.
Is this okay? Is this okay?
No, I'm hearing a lot of... your voice is like robot mode. It's not your voice.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but there's a lot of feedback in your voice.
Let me put it closer, inshallah. Hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what I wanted to suggest is following. As Sister Ghazala pointed out, when we are really talking to children, we, just as we have different age levels in the school system.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Sheikh, can I
Yes.
ask you to log off and log on again? Because there's a lot of resonance in... Yeah, it's really hard to hear you.
The audio is not great. Good, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I will.
Actually, now it's...
So,
That's me. Sorry, that's me. Yeah.
There
We'll
was
join
some
again.
resonance, right? I think
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
logged off, it might get better.
Inshallah. Yeah, I just joined, invited him. Can you try now? Yeah, he's joining. Can you try now? Inshallah. Unmute. Okay, yeah, please try now.
is it better?
Same, pretty much same, but yeah.
Then I will not talk. I will not talk. It's okay.
Sorry, yeah.
No problem.
It improved. No, it improved, mashallah. Try, keep going. Let's see.
Okay, try now.
Go ahead,
please.
Sheikh.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sheikh.
Try now, please, Imam. Yeah.
What I think, what is important is that we cannot talk plain field to all kids.
Yes.
Because that information cannot be processed. And that's the reason why we have curriculum for different ages. And we know very well that, you know, at that point of time, when we start talking to all kids in the family and on the same level, and our Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us, "Kallim nasi ala qadri uqulihim," talk to people on their level of understanding and comprehension. It is very much important to realize that some kids could get scared if they hear some of these stories. They cannot comprehend the whole thing. That we add fears into their lives. So what we need to do basically, as Ghazala pointed out, is that we really need to break it down in our families so that kids who are able to comprehend it talk to them, and kids who are not able, we even don't mention it to them, even don't talk to them. That's quite an educational approach the Prophet, peace be upon him, used and taught us. Jazakumullah khair.
And mashallah, when you came back, it's much, much better. There was none of that feedback, mashallah. I'd like to, before I introduce our final speaker, I'd like to mention two things related to what I've heard tonight. When we're trying to make things age appropriate for our kids, this reminds me of when our children start eating at a very young age, we don't feed them the same food that's at the dinner table. And for families that use spicy food in their food, usually when a child is very young, like under a year, you don't really add a lot of spice. You might add a bit of salt, a bit of pepper, and eventually, gradually, they start joining the family and they start eating from the food we eat, but it's very gradual. And I think parents are very, very aware of that. You can't add hot food to a child. And it's something gradual, you just add it gradually. And I think we understand that when it comes to cooking and food and what a baby can eat and what a toddler can eat and what a teenager can handle. But this is the same idea, that you give someone or you give your children the message that's appropriate for their age and something they can hopefully process, and you work with them as they process it. Because I have so many grandchildren, they might be the exact same age. Some of them are able to process these things quickly and come up with a solution, and some of them might take longer. And recently I had this experience with my grandchildren. We're moving to a new home, and it was interesting to see just the move. Like, it's not a tragic event, it's not trauma, but a move is a huge deal emotionally for a child. And I just saw the 4 children and how each of them took the move completely different, and they needed to be talked to in different ways to process that this is a good thing. And if they're having trouble with the idea of moving and losing some friends and losing some neighbors and not knowing what the new neighbors would be like, this is normal, and how to walk them through that process of movement. And it just really got me to think. And my final point, and something I tell myself all the time, whenever these tragedies happen and continue to happen, and will continue to happen all over the world, is that hadith about, I believe it's Nawawi or Qudsi hadith, that if the whole creation will gather to harm a person, no harm will come to me except that which Allah will permit. And I believe that's tied into what Principal Ghazala mentioned about having trust in Allah. And for me, living in Quebec and being an almost senior citizen, I always ask myself, like, why am I in Quebec? Why am I here when I know and I see and I feel there is a level of discrimination that makes me uncomfortable? But it's been that way since I was 4. Like, it's not something new. So I have the choice to move to Ontario. I have the choice to move anywhere in the world, actually. But harm can come if Allah permits it. So I need to have that trust and that stability in my own faith that no harm will come to me. And if it does, this is something Allah has decreed for me. And even at 58, it's something I struggle with. And I struggle with it, I would say, every day. I don't think it's something that's going to go away. And I just have to learn to do it, and because I don't want to be reactive, although it's hard not to be reactive, but I want to already have my decision made before anything happens to me or to anyone around me. Jazakallah khairan. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker for tonight, Dr. Aisha Sherazi from Furqan School. And this is a very, 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 very dear and beautiful sister to me. And for anyone who's interacted or worked with her or met her or heard her, I remember meeting Dr. Aisha when she first arrived. And I'm going to be very honest, I was attracted to her accent. I love the British accent. It's just the coolest thing I ever heard. But then eventually I had to realize that she's, mashallah, beautiful, but not just because of her accent, because she has so many gems and so many approaches to difficult things. And she always has a way of bringing it down to, how do you say, the lowest common denominator, making sense of things that we often struggle to make sense of. Jazakallah khair, everybody. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Aisha. Go ahead. It's yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much. I hope I'm not presenting a gloomy picture after we've had such hopeful and hopeful messages. I'm going to share a little bit about the public school system. The vast majority of our kids at some point or another interact with the public school system. And it's very typical that your children come home and you ask them, how was your day? And they say, fine. And you say to them, what did you learn? And they say, well, and they have nothing much to tell you. So it can be very difficult to know what really is happening at school sometimes. And so I'm going to share a few slides with you. The slides are really just to help me make sure that I think about all the things that I wanted to say. And basically, I'm going to lead you through a little bit about Islamophobia in schools and, navigating that situation, and how you can support your child through Ontario's public schools. I'm going to give some examples. They're not indicative of the whole of the experience of the public school system. The vast majority of public schools are great places. They're very nurturing, and they create amazing environments for children. That being said, there are always going to be gaps. And so, it isn't the mandate of the public school system to necessarily be able to navigate this space easily. And the schools actually will need your support as parents. So I'll go through very quickly. Whoops. So there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that suggests that students experience peer pressure and racism and Islamophobia. And of course, all students are experiencing peer pressure, but not all students are experiencing racism, and not all students are experiencing racism and Islamophobia. So if you think about, some of the pressure that our kids are under, I think it helps sort of us navigate a little bit. And there are concerns, for example, the basic things. So for example, students praying has come up before. Students fasting has come up. I recall a couple of years ago, the school board reaching out to me and saying that some teachers are frustrated that students are wanting to fast, and that they didn't feel that students shouldn't, they were concerned that students were not allowed to drink water, students weren't drinking water now while doing track and field events and sports events. And that caused some frustration. And it was hard for the students to be able to say, this is my choice. Like, I am fasting, I want to observe my fast, but I also want to take part in school activities. And it was almost like they were being put in a position where they were told, you know what, you need to choose, right? Either you play sports and you be like everybody else, or you fast and you follow your religion. And so our children are having to navigate those spaces, sometimes with our support and sometimes without our support, because they may not mention it to us. And it's very hard. And then there are stereotypes that they're having to deal with as well. So if I can go through, a few years ago, some of us that are here will remember the public school board. One of the trustees, Pam Fitzgerald, proposed a motion to look into what exactly is happening in terms of religion in public schools. And, there was a lot of discussion about prayer shouldn't be taking place in public schools. And many of our children opt to complete their salah, which is mandatory, when they're at school. Sometimes it may be just dhuhr, sometimes it might be asr. It depends on the school and the age. But also, many of our high school students wanted to be able to pray Salatul Jummah. And so they would organize Jummah prayers. There was mashallah, a group, MYO, that organized imams to come in and to give the khutbah. And it was operating for a long time with no issue. And suddenly this issue came up. And once again, the Muslim community finds itself under a microscope. So, one of the things that we need to understand as parents when it comes to dealing with the public school system is there is a real taboo about religion in public school spaces in general. So, there's a whole layer of religion doesn't belong in the public school sphere, and that's understandable. But then added to that is the whole, you know, Muslim thing where, you know, we have been vilified in the media for many years. Our kids are having to deal with those issues. You know, how do I feel about my identity when I'm always portrayed as the bad guy, right? So our kids are under quite a bit of pressure as a result of that. MashaAllah, in that scenario, hundreds of Muslims turned up to the board meeting to express concern about this, about the thought of prayer being banned for their kids. And the board voted against that motion as a result of that. So it shows us that, you know, being a part of the system and getting engaged and involved is absolutely essential in shaping and forming public opinions as well. Because if we're going to sit at home and just feel bad about things, then things are not going to change. So this is an anecdotal example. A sister in the community came to me and said, you know, I'm really concerned. This young man's father had a history of mental illness, and her son started wearing thobe. And then just like sometimes teenagers get lazy and they start coming to school a bit late, and the school just involved the police, like without telling her. And so again, these are some of the stereotypes. He happened to be a young black male, and all of a sudden he's wearing thobe and he's being a bit, you know, we need to get the police involved in this. And it was very odd. So, you know, it's just highlights some of the breakdowns in communication that are taking place. This is another anecdotal example that one of the students expressed to me, not at Marival, at a different school. And she said, when prayer time started happening right as the school day ended, and I might miss my prayer if I waited until I got home, I decided I would go to the library to pray because it's a clear, clean, quiet space for prayer. She said, I didn't think I was harming anybody. And then suddenly, she said, a teacher came to me and stood right in front of me while I was in the middle of my prayer. She began yelling, what are you doing here? You don't have permission to be here. She said it took me a lot of patience and strength for me not to break my prayer. Afterwards, the teacher was more angry because she felt like this girl was being rude to her. So she said, she explained, Miss, I was in the middle of my prayer. I couldn't respond to you and break my prayer. And after that, she found that the library was locked. She wasn't allowed to go there. So, you know, our kids feel these things very keenly. The next example I'm giving you is actually taken from a study that was conducted on Islamophobia in schools. This was the example. Basically, and the students talking about meeting a new teacher, it could be a supply teacher. And the student says, basically, most of them, when they first see me, like on the first day of school, or maybe a supply substitute teacher or something, they just look at me. And their initial reaction is just shock, like, my God, you're allowed out of your house. And then they tend to talk to me like in slow English. And I just answer back in proper English. And then they think, okay, fine, she's been born here. She knows English. So, you know, again, and this wasn't told to me directly, but these kinds of stereotypes, these kinds of ideas, these kinds of biases creep in to the system. And they can happen at any level. I mean, it's not just in schools, but because children and young people are vulnerable, how they feel about themselves is impacted by these sorts of situations. It's very important that we really address Islamophobia in schools. So another concern is about the materials that are being used to teach. So for example, a review of Canadian geography and history textbooks found that their portrayal of Islam contains, errors, factual issues, questionable assertions and omissions that reinforce negative stereotypes, okay? And several books used for literacy in classrooms, such as 3 Cups of Tea, The Breadwinner, and Reading Lolita in Tehran, confirm many of the negative stereotypes already perpetuated by the media, where Muslims are either aggressors or are in need of saving by the white man. I can remember, for example, being invited to take part in a book club because the teacher had chosen quite an inflammatory book, and it was called The Trouble with Islam. And, you know, there were Muslim kids in that group. And so we read it together, and I found myself, you know, trying to be supportive on that front. It's very difficult. It's very difficult when our kids are encountering these issues. So some kids end up rebelling completely, and some kids become two people. So you become one person at home, and then you become one person at school, okay? And I grew up as a minority in the UK. And when I was growing up, racism was very, very, very normal, very rampant. And so I remember being like that. I remember, you know, sort of trying to fit in with the crowd at school and be like everybody else. And then at home, speaking a different language, eating different food. If I had friends over, like I would want, you know, I didn't necessarily feel like comfortable for my family to share what food they had. I would feel a bit embarrassed if my parents spoke to me in their language because my friends wouldn't understand. I feel that kids today have it a lot better because you can do all of those things and be yourself, and diversity is celebrated. That being said, you know, we have to be honest and realize that this is a possibility for our kids. And so we see that happening. Sometimes, you know, Muhammad will become Mo, right? We see that kids are just changing what they are and how they portray them.
Sorry, I think you muted yourself.
Dr. Aisha, we can't hear you anymore.
No, she's going to unmute herself. I accidentally muted.
My apologies. Okay, what did you miss completely what I said, or
No, just last sentence. You're
okay.
good.
Yeah. So I guess the what I wanted to say was that this is a possibility, that our kids, you know, feel that they need to become different characters at school. So Muhammad will become Mo and different things of that nature. So we need to be careful about it. And look at the signs, you know, look at what our kids are going through and invite them to be honest and open with us, because those are signs that something is happening, that they're feeling a certain way. So there are three major themes to look out for. Sometimes it's, you know, feelings of isolation and alienation. There might be a lack of awareness about Islam and Muslims among peers and teachers. And there's a general lack of representation of Muslims in teaching and in curriculum design as well. So those are three things that we need to really work on, supporting our kids through feelings of isolation and alienation, getting engaged in terms of, you know, what is the knowledge that teachers and principals and others have about Islam and Muslims. You know, my son attended a public school, high school in a rural area. And mashallah, during that time, you know, numerous Muslim students got together to hold an iftar during Ramadan and invited everybody. And some kids were doing henna, and some kids were you know, they had like a Kahoot about what do you know about Islam, and they had lots of food. They had a big potluck, and the vice principal was an amazing individual who said he had fasted on that day. And he said to me, Aisha, I fasted because I wanted to be able to tell staff what the kids experience. You know, when teachers are a bit impatient with them, like these kids need a lot of our patience because they are fasting. He said, I felt dreadful. I felt so tired. I had brain fog. And then we expect them to do everything as they normally would. And if they don't, then we blame you know, something that they're trying to do that will instill self-discipline. So there are plenty of allies in the Muslim community and plenty of allies in the non-Muslim community. But it's about seeking them out and really getting, you know, the message out. So here are some of the things that we can do as parents ourselves, okay? So one is, you know, spend quality time together, take a genuine interest in what your children are doing. I'll be very honest, you know, like my daughter talks nonstop about some of the games that she plays, and she talks to us about it. And it's not fun because we don't play that game, but we do try to just be patient and listen to everything and take an interest. You know, become engaged at school. One of the things that I did was join school council, because if you have representation at school council, mashallah, it makes a lot of a difference in terms of how the school perceives the Muslim community, in terms of them being a partner in the schooling of children and Muslim children. Ghazala said it very, very eloquently, Umayma did, and Imam Zijad did as well, you know, listening actively to your child and what they might be experiencing. Don't expect your child to propose all the solutions, but don't expect them to adopt your solutions either. So it's very, very difficult because, you know, sometimes you want to be able to say to your child, okay, what do you think we could do about this? And online bullying, Dr. Salim was going to address this. You know, some of our kids are being teased online, right? So it's not necessarily happening in front of a teacher, or it's not necessarily happening in front of you. And it's very difficult. So just being open and having those conversations, but not necessarily expecting your kids to come up with all the answers and not expecting them to adopt your solutions. I know my teenage daughter would rather, you know, throw herself in a river than listen to anything I've got to say or any of my ideas. Her favorite phrase is, "You don't understand." So, you know, I think it comes down to just actively listening and being that caring parent and listening to them just for the sake of listening. You know, having conversations with your child's school about Islamophobia, if pertinent, and saying, you know, I'm concerned about this. Do you think there's something we can do? There's plenty of really good speakers in the community. Imam Zijad is one of them. You know, in that issue where we had about prayer, he got to know the local trustee and explained about prayer in schools. And she was really, you know, that helped her understand the situation to be able to vote that it should be allowed. And so we have lots of very strong advocates. You know, ask your child's school what specific training that staff may have had about Islamophobia. You are within your rights to ask your child's school, you know, what training have your staff had on this topic? Is it something that is on your radar? Are you looking at this? You know, ask if you can connect them with any of the community resources or materials to help. And ask if you can share your child's culture on special occasions and explore ways to do that, especially at elementary level. Those things go down very well. And I think the schools will be more open to doing that. I actually just, coming back to one of the questions in the chat about how do we help other parents understand that Islamophobia is real if they haven't experienced it themselves. I can honestly say, alhamdulillah, my experience hasn't been negative in Ottawa. I field a lot of these questions and issues. Some of the police work involved with the Ottawa Police Service as well, having to field some of those issues that would come up. And actually last week, one of the students in a public school in Quebec, where I gave a presentation, the parent had requested that the school do this, and so the school did. And one of the students asked me at the end of the presentation, have you ever had someone be mean to you? And I said, actually not to me, but, you know, in 2015, one of my friends who is a vice principal in the public school system, who has white skin and she wears a hijab, someone had collected dog poop from her whole neighborhood and piled it out, collected it in a bag, taken the time to do that, piled it onto her doorstep and wrote "go home" on her doorstep. Okay, so there is plenty of horrifying stories. If people are not on board with how serious this is, then, you know, you can't convince. I mean, ultimately, alhamdulillah, this is not necessarily our role, but I think, you know, having those examples to tell people, it helps them really understand the gravity, because it's not about whether it's happened to you. It's about the fact that it's happening to us. And, you know, we are in this together. If it could happen to you, it might as well happen to me. And I think that's the thing that our children are absorbing, is a single experience in a small community is like a pebble, like, you know, it ripples out and has a very big impact. So I will leave it there, inshallah. I'm not sure if there are, I see some questions here. Do you advise that Muslim parents get more involved in parent council? Absolutely. So how do you get involved with parent council? I should let you know. Usually at the beginning of the school year, you know, often the school might send a note out, but even if they don't send an email out, like, you know, check the school's website, that kind of thing. School council meetings are usually posted on there. And you just turn up. The first meeting, you can turn up to any school council meeting. So you don't have to be voted to do a particular job. You just show up and you can sit and listen. MashaAllah, at West, like I sat on school council for many years and really tried to be actively involved and organize things, and it was appreciated. But, you know, MashaAllah, we had a Naqabi sister who was secretary. You know, and mashallah, it's wonderful that our, you know, brothers and sisters, if you can be involved and just at that table, you will give a feeling to those people that are there that you are there, you're visible, okay, you're not invisible. Microaggressions are just as harmful, if not more, as overt racism. Absolutely. This is why we need to motivate our children to take the leadership role. 100%, 100%. So what if the child says that no matter what you do, people with Islamophobic attitudes won't change? Honestly, you know, the thing is again, it's very hard to convert people, right? I mean, you know, there's no compulsion to believe anything. Nobody has a compulsion to believe in anything. That being said, it's tricky, but I think, you know, what you do is you help people understand that no matter what, it is quite difficult for someone who's experiencing that. And if it happens to someone, then it's happening to everyone, right? And if it's happening to everyone, then we have to go back to what Imam Zijad said and what Sister Ghazala said, which is, you know, we practice the Sunnah and then we leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we're able to practice the Sunnah and then leave it to Allah, alhamdulillah, then, you know, Allah is the best, you know, the best of planners, and he has a plan, and there's always khair in something. I always say there is khair in everything that happens, and so we shouldn't feel like this is just, you know, we cannot overcome this. Inshallah, and we will. Oh, Imam Zijad, you're muted.
Assalamu alaikum. When it comes to education, schools, I have always promoted this. There are three things that must happen if we Muslims want to feel secure and comfortable, content in Canada. One, we have to have more Muslim teachers in schools. You see, it's good to be an engineer, it's all good. Good to be a medical doctor, it's all good. But we also need to have some teachers, some social workers. We need some counselors, because this is where we are missing greatly. Imagine some schools in Ottawa are having 20, 30% Muslim kids. No Muslim teacher. Imagine, second point, some schools are having 20, 30% of Muslim kids. No Muslim parent on the parents committee. Okay. And lastly, what is also interesting, all kids are very smart kids. They are top students in many of the schools, but many of them don't feel engaging in leadership roles. And that is, these 3 points are very essential if we would like to get that recognition from the others. That is why we have to have more parents on the school committee, more teachers engaged in education and being role models to our students, as well as some sort of ambassadors of Islam within the school system. And our kids who are part of the system, they must be role models in the school. They must be kids who would be walking the talk as far as Islam is concerned, being out there for the community and for themselves. And these are 3 things that definitely we have to do more within the larger community as Muslims or Canadian Muslims, part of the system.
Maybe one of the things that we could do in the masajids that we have is offer youth leadership training. Literally, just because I think sometimes these are big bags that we're asking our kids to carry, and especially at this time, to ask somebody to be an ambassador of anything is difficult. I know at my age, I still shy away from representing the Muslim community because I think, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? I'm always like very, very nervous about representing anyone and anything. And I usually do say that when appointed to these roles, but maybe that's something that we need to work on, inshallah.
Certainly, I do agree. There has to be more communal, guidance of Muslim kids. We as imams, as well as administrative leaders of the masajid, we have to think about some of these, workshops that are training youth of how to lead within the public school system and present that beauty of Islam, as well as on the other end, how really they need to engage within the largest school system. Not just think about Islam and Muslims and themselves, but rather think about larger society. That's how society is going to accept them more than if they come with their own baggage, their own demands. When we come forward and ready to help the larger society, then we will create sympathizers with us. And then we will start getting support from the other people.
Jazakallah khair for that to everyone. Actually, Sister Umayma had to step away, so she just asked me to wrap things up here, and we were asked to end the session by 8:30 p.m. as people need to get ready for Maghrib. I just want to take this opportunity to say Jazakallah khair to all the presenters this evening, Imam Zijad, Dr. Aisha, and I want to also acknowledge SNMC and CBET to help to put this wonderful and very informative session that's really just a starting point in this very, very important conversation. And perhaps we can organize some future events, inshallah, over the course of the next few months, inshallah. And also just to mention that, Dr. Salim was confirmed for this session, but he couldn't be here, unfortunately, today. So we will try, inshallah, to get him for next time, as that topic of cyberbullying and just online Islamophobia is a very, very important topic that would probably need its own session to take up some of those important points. So inshallah, we will wrap it up here. Once again, Jazakallah khair to everyone, and remember to take care of yourself and take care of your families, inshallah, and then lean on each other during this time. So we'll leave it at that.
Inshallah, we'll set up something with the brother Salim on the topic that we missed today soon, inshallah. Another session, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for everyone for contributing this. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.